and then next year there's going to be fills. Only fills. You got to be
Just
Phil.
fills only.
Only
fills.
Only fills sounds like a really, really weird website.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/EternalDirtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blechman. Phil, how's it going, man?
I'm sorry, Zach. You mean Phil Nguyen? Wrong Phil, Zach.
There is no wrong Phil. They're all good Phils.
We're all the right Phil. You know, for all the Phils of the world, you know, this is actually a very Phil-centric podcast, given that today we're going to be talking about some Premodern. And is Phil the most dominant name in Premodern?
You know, I think it is. And did I tell you that I kind of friended all these different Premodern Phils on Discord with the intention of setting up a Phil-only Premodern league? Like, there's at least 8 of us out here who are pretty fairly well known in the content creator / deck creator space, and it's pretty amazing. So I think one of these days I'm gonna have to set that up.
I think 2026 LobsterCon, there's going to be, you know, there's the side events on Fridays. We're going to talk about those, but there's the side events on the day before the main event. And I think there's Unchained with no ban list. There's regular vanilla for people who just want us to get some practice. There's no fetch lands, enemy shock lands. And then next year there's going to be fills. Only fills. You got to be Phil.
Fills only.
Fills only.
Only fills.
Only fills sounds like a really, really weird website.
Only fills sounds
probably
like
just Premodern content.
Yeah, very profitable, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I think maybe right after this, I'm gonna purchase that domain name.
Well, you know, aside from being a Phil, we did invite you on to the podcast because we wanted to talk about Premodern, and you are the go-to guy that we like to talk to Premodern about. You literally just right before this, you just dropped an MTGBANDING newsletter that I haven't even gotten a chance to dig into yet. So I'm very excited for that. So as always, you can go to Phil Nguyen's Substack and join the MTGBANDING newsletter every interval that you decide. I don't know what the interval is off the top of my head.
Well, it's basically whenever I feel like it, which ends up being about a month. And I think that's kind of the nice thing about Premodern is it moves, but it doesn't move exceptionally fast. So you can take your time to
we used to feel that way about Legacy, but you know.
Yeah, I mean things change, but you can check it out. It's mtgbanding.com. I think it actually might be the second most subscribed Magic the Gathering Substack out there.
That's saying something.
Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Premodern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
I know people just love these niche made-up formats.
Do you know what the first? Not to throw you under the bus here. Do you know what the first one is?
It's the Ristic Studies.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone's of course. Yeah. That makes sense.
Being second to Sam at Ristic Studies is that's a easy place to be. We all want to be there.
Yeah.
I put that on my resume. Just second to Ristic Studies.
The Premodern community, man, it goes hard. It's also the most viewed article on EternalDirtles.com is our Premodern primer piece.
It is. Ironically, the second most viewed article is one of my articles. So second to Premodern, who is second to Ristic Studies.
It's a fine place to be.
Can I ask you what I think most people are interested in about Premodern before we dive? We have a questions list. We're going to get to all of it, but I want to tackle the jugular right up front. I think that's what our viewership wants to hear, which is what is the origin of the deck pick, and then what is your favorite deck picture of all time?
Man, I love talking about deck photography, and
deck with an E photography.
No, this is on OnlyFills.
Yeah, this is. We should probably
That's what OnlyFills is just deck pics.
We should gate this content. Yeah, that would be actually a really interesting story about what is the origin of the deck photo. And I find it really interesting that some formats are really into deck photography and others are not, right? Despite seeing so much EDH content out there, I feel I don't see a ton of EDH deck photos. Maybe it's just because it's like 100 cards is a lot of cards to take a picture of.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they have their mock field and stuff too. So that might be part of it.
And you're like just throwing cards in and out all the time. So maybe it doesn't make sense. But, pre-modern and also old school are really big into deck photos. And I've been experimenting with different deck layouts for a long time. And I'll just go through this real quick because I know other people want to talk about other subjects too. But like for a while, I was like lining them up on my playmat. So like this rectangular landscape method. And then I don't know who inspired me, but I switched to like a grid format into a square. And I find this really funny because I basically equate it to like our social media progression. Like for a while I was doing it in landscape, which I consider like Facebook photography. Like that was when everyone was like on their desktop and like, landscape made the most sense for a computer screen. And then I did it a square format, which is 10 across and then 6 down, which ends up being a square, which is perfect for Instagram.
I was going to say for like, CRT TVs.
Or that, yeah. But, Instagram like did this change recently where the grid is not a square anymore. It's like a portrait mode, which is kind of annoying for people who like plan their grid around that. But lately I've been experimenting with like a vertical like portrait mode alignment, which is 6 across, and 10 down, which is mobile optimized, and that's the TikTok generation now. And so like if you're on your phone and you like are scrolling and you click on it, it'll like fill up your entire screen. And so a few people in New York have been doing that now, and I kind of like it. It's pretty interesting. And then you just arrange your cards into like play sets are in a grid, so they're in 4. So you do like 4, 4, and like 2 to do the 6 across. Yeah, I don't know. It's fun.
It's like sagas, enchantment sagas, where the image is down the side.
Yeah.
So now you put your deck image on one side and then your tournament report on the other.
That's the next one. Yeah, obviously we haven't entered the saga deck pick yet.
I want to point out, Phil,
another reason that they're so popular, Phil, is because it's very easy to grok a 60 card deck. What's going on versus like an EDH deck where you're just like, what is happening here? It's 100 different cards, right? Like maybe there's some crossover on basic lands, but you really have to look at a deck and be like, there's so much happening here. Whereas like a pre-modern deck, a legacy deck, you can get a pretty quick idea relatively quickly of what's going on.
That's true. I mean, I'm sure the card pool for EDH is obviously like the biggest card pool out there for the most part, right? And it's like, legacy, pre-modern, like everyone's sort of running the same cards more or less, but EDH is a whole different world. So yeah, I totally get your point. And people love expressing their personalities with different printings or frame treatments in EDH, and that probably makes it pretty hard just to visually see as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see all of those deck lists at the pre-modern championships at LobsterCon.
Yeah,
like that segue, Phil.
Yeah, it was very smooth.
It was a very smooth segue, and I just want to bottle cap it by de-segueing and saying the way to actually combine your Substack with Ristic Studies Substack is the origin of the deck pick video.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that.
I would love that. That would be great. Since we're segueing, I've like tried to experiment with like different types of like deck photos and deck lists. Like this last one, I did this Tribal Wars League for pre-modern. I did this elemental deck, and I've been like really big into Severance recently, which I don't know if anyone watches. Obviously, people watch, but I did this deck where I did 20 different unique elementals. So the deck's name was "Please try to enjoy each elemental equally," which is like a reference in Severance. And I made this like crossword puzzle, like the Severance workers like are always doing this like word search. So I made this crossword puzzle for the deck list. I don't know. I've also had in my head to do like an ASMR deck reading of one of my decks one of these times. Maybe I'll hire Phil to do a rap.
I'll happily come up with any rap for any of these deck pick purposes for only Phil's. I think that I'm gonna re-segue us back into talking about LobsterCon by
let's do it. Sorry,
by promoting the forthcoming MTG Banding Award for Best Deck Pick at LobsterCon.
I think it shouldn't just be me. It should just be only Phil's. I think we should start launching our brand. So yeah, I'll actually do that. Let's do it together. We'll do a best deck photo for only Phil's award.
Awesome. Well, there we have it. So,
all right.
So now let's actually talk about LobsterCon. So many things are happening at LobsterCon, but specifically the Premodern championships are going on. That is, today's we're at the end of March. This is going to come out on the 27th. LobsterCon happens on Phil's birthday on May 2nd.
Wow. That's amazing.
Big, just for Phil. But
it's a big day for Phil's. I'm going to take it down for all the Phil's out there.
Absolutely.
But to that end, we've got a month left, and so far as I know, I haven't checked the internet today, we haven't heard anything from Martin Berlin about bans. We have to talk about what we're going to expect to be at LobsterCon. Metagame shifts in the last year. There's a lot to cover. But I think the first thing I want to talk about is what the format looks like right now.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think that if you're going into LobsterCon, there's a few decks which everyone is like focused on or worrying about. Obviously, the boogeyman this year is Mono Blue Dreadnought. It kind of had its breakout last LobsterCon, and I think, what was that, like September? So it's not been that many months, but it's basically been the deck that everyone is talking about, focusing on, working on. And so I think going into LobsterCon, if you want to have a chance at, top 8 or winning it all, having a good plan against Dreadnought, or maybe just relying on your luck and avoiding it, is like really, really the thing that everyone is being prepared for. I think there's a couple other decks which are widely viewed as some of the best decks right now. Replenish is still a boogeyman in the format. Going into LobsterCon last year, Replenish was one of the 2 decks that people were the most worried about. And I don't think it had a very strong showing, but there's still a lot of good players on the deck. It's still a good deck. And so that's another one that people are preparing for. And then finally, in my mind, the other decks that people should be focusing on are Terrageddon and Mono Blue Tide. I think is really well positioned still. It was really well positioned last year, and I think a lot of people have been trying it out and been enjoying it. And then finally is like this new crop of black or green decks. There's like a lot of different varieties of this, but I think black green is one of those decks that people should be prepared for.
This seems like one of those under the radar decks that I haven't seen yet. Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe to the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Turtles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Dirtle Maniacs at patreon.com/EternalDirtles.
Now back to the show.
Yeah, it's interesting because, it's kind of funny because, Martin Berlin, in one of my Premodern roundtables earlier this year, mentioned that he was considering ways about boosting black in Premodern. He didn't really hint at how he was going to do that, but there are certain pockets of the community that felt like black was underpowered relative to other colors. But since that time, there's been no action, and actually black decks have become fairly popular. There's a few different strategies of this black-green deck. Like, one of the most popular is essentially this deck that combines Tempting Worm with discard. It's kind of evolved out of a Tempting Worm plus Bottomless Pit plus the Rack deck. So basically you would try to empty out your opponent's hand, and then you would have aggressive creatures like Tempting Worm, which now your opponent's hand is empty or relatively empty, so you can play this 5/5 for 2 mana. And it also ran stuff like Call the Herd, also could do like Ravenous Rats or Wall of Blossoms, and just like 8 discard spells, sometimes even more. So that's one variant. There's also this so-called Broccoli Soup deck, which is essentially a green splash of like a black aggro deck. And that's been very popular too. So you have your aggressive black creatures, plus you have Rancor, you have Naturalize, you have Call the Herd, stuff like that. And so like those 2 varieties are pretty popular. Plus, probably the most popular, I should have mentioned earlier, is kind of like Survival Rock, essentially.
That like the Godzilla style like Rexer deck.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's essentially similar to Rexer, except there is no color splash. So like Rexer used to often play red for like Avalanche Riders, or other creatures. This one is pretty much just black-green and just has a lot of resiliency in terms of like its creature package, has answers to basically everything. And just, survival of the fittest kind of pulls it all together. So those three like black-green decks have seen a really big explosion in popularity. So I think those are decks that you should be prepared for, mostly because I think that people find them very fun and they're not all survival decks are like complicated in their own way, but I think they're a deck that you can play for a long time, like through a long tournament, through several rounds. So I think, and they're also relatively cheap too. So I think it's like those factors make it a popular choice.
Yeah, you can
for
get your Gold
LobsterCon.
Border survivals for like $40-$50, right?
Yeah, or you just beat Brian Selden in a round.
Yeah.
Last LobsterCon, he brought the Brian Selden World Championship survivals, and if you beat him in a round, he would give you one and sign
That's amazing. That was one of the first when I started playing Premodern. I bought like a bunch of gold decks, and that was one of the first ones I got. So I was like, "Oh, sick! I don't have to buy like what I don't know what are survivals now, like $400 or something. Who knows?"
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I think those are the most popular decks. There's a few like sleeper decks that I think could be popular too, but I think those are the main decks that I would try to cover. If I wanted to go far at LobsterCon.
Well, let's talk about the metagame as a whole. What are some of the big threats, like just creatures that you have to look out for, win conditions that you have to look out for in Premodern right now?
Yeah, I mean, Premodern has always been a pretty diverse format. There's a lot of strategies that people bring, and a lot of strategies are competitive. Like I said, I think Stifle Knot is like the biggest thing that people have to worry about right now. And that deck has gone through a lot of different changes that we can talk about in a little bit, which has made it particularly difficult to address and also interesting to play. And then I think the other threat that people have to worry about are just like very powerful enchantments. So Survival of the Fittest is a big one, as well as Oath of Druids. I think the other powerful enchantments are like Parallax Tide and similarly Parallax Wave. Those are also very difficult because they're very difficult to interact with once they're in play. And so they sometimes require a different answer other than like a naturalize or disenchant. And then finally, I would say that like, if you're building out your sideboard, just like small creatures are a big threat too. Like there's always Goblin Lackey, which is a big one, or Hermit Druid. There's Argothian Enchantress. There's just these like tiny creatures which kind of like spiral out if you don't like address them. And so just having some sort of early answer to tiny creatures is kind of where I'd be thinking.
What are the best answers to? You're going in, you're brewing something new, and you need to at least respect the creatures, and whether it's tall like Dreadnought or wide like Goblins.
Yeah.
But what are the most potent answers that people should include as like a baseline start point for a brew to at least be competitively viable?
Yeah, I mean, the best removal in the format still remains Swords to Plowshares. It's like an insane card that fits pretty much everywhere if you're running white. And so like that's the easy answer. I would say that I've been really liking Engineered Plague recently. Like I've been playing this like Junk Terrageddon deck, which runs 3 to 4 in the sideboard. It's just like a super flexible card. It helps clear. Obviously, 3 mana is a lot, and goblins can hit you like turn 2, and so if you're not running some sort of acceleration like Dark Ritual or Mox Diamond, it can be a little late. But I do like Engineered Plague for taking out elves, goblins. We also get random stuff, like I said, like Hermit Druid, or if you see Phyrexian Devourer, that's another one that Engineered Plague gets, and so I really like that. But yeah, I think that those are like the main ones. If you're running like heavy into black, like Snuff Out is pretty good if you're running enough Swamp. Lightning Bolt remains a classic, however many years later, that addresses a lot of things. It doesn't address Terravor usually, but it's still a good card. And so yeah, it kind of depends on what you're running. I've been seeing a lot of Gilded Drakes recently too, which are pretty sweet. They're pretty expensive, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're like $200 right now.
Yeah, but if you're running like Survival or something, it's honestly just like a really unexpected card because like sometimes, you're expecting your Terravor to get removed or your Dreadnought to be removed or bounced, and you're like, whatever, I'll have time to rebuild or recast it. But, Gilded Drake just kind of flips everything, and suddenly your clock becomes very short. And so I think that's like a sneaky good card these days.
Yeah. Obviously, there sideboard tech options for stuff like Stifle Not, like Overload, had become popular over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Several ways to get rid of that. I think actually one of the best removal spells that's not Swords to Plowshares right now is Chain of Vapor.
Yeah, that's a great call. I mean, Chain of Vapor is just like such a flexible card, and it's really been in a lot of the Dreadnought builds as well as Mono Blue Tide, mostly because it does interact favorably with Parallax Tide. You have it out in the field and you target 5 lands, and with those on the stack, use the chain to bounce the tide back to your hand. And so you essentially can exile up to 5 lands permanently, return the tide to your hand, and then you can even copy the chain and bounce another one of their things. And so it's just like an insane amount of value. And so yeah, it's definitely a good card. Even against like Goblin Lackey, sometimes all you need is just like one turn. And so if you can bounce it, and then the second turn you might have like counter magic up. And so
sometimes an
it's
unsummon
really
is good
card.
enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to a deck that I like that plays Chain of Vapor is Stasis, and I wanted to share this with you. I shared this with Phil Blechman yesterday, and I'm going to put this over into our Discord, and I'll pop it up on the screen for people to check out. But I think I leveled up here. So here's this email I got yesterday. It says, "Hello, I've been a long-time Magic the Gathering player and listener to the podcast. I'm currently the admin of the Stasis Discord and remembered Zach recently shared his passion for the deck in an episode a while back. Since I haven't really played Magic in the last 4 years and significally longer since I played Stasis, I wanted to reach out and see if he was interested in taking over that role. I am now the administrator of the Stasis Discord."
We call
You did it, fam.
We call Zach now the Stasis in Chief. Congratulations.
I plan on doing no changes to the Discord in the fact that that's what Stasis would want. No changes.
Yeah,
nothing
exactly.
happens.
Very flavorfully done. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, so I have like a list of decks which I think are under the radar, and then I have a list of decks which I think are like under the radar, and Stasis is in that second pile, which because I honestly think that it can be really good if it's built well and the players know what they're doing. I think it's just kind of sneakily a good deck.
Phil, can you be the arbiter on a debate that Zach and I have been having about Stasis for decades at this point?
This is decades that we've known each other since 2014.
What is the correct number of Thwart to play in your Stasis deck?
Oh man, so Stasis unfortunately is one of those decks that I've actually okay. So Stasis was randomly my intro into Legacy. So I stopped playing Magic around 2006 or 7.
Okay.
And then I got back into Magic in 2016 with Legacy. And Stasis was the first deck that I built. But other than that, I haven't actually played a ton of Stasis in Premodern, but I have wanted to build like this like secret lair version of Stasis. But the one problem is that Thwart actually has no other printings, which is really unfortunate. So I guess my answer is 0.
Lair of Thwart.
Yeah,
you can play Rewind.
That's true. Also, there's no Forsaken City reprints.
Oh.
I think those are the main two. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, Thwart is really good, but you need to have 3 islands out. So I don't know. What is the correct answer?
So Zach and I have been debating forever. Zach dabbles back and forth. He's a 2 to 3 Thwart bro.
I'm checking right now what my current list is.
He's the Stasis in Chief, Phil, and he's not running the full playset of Thwart, which I know objectively to be correct.
Look, someone asked me to be the Stasis Discord owner, and no one asked you.
That's because I'm over here doing shenanigans. But do you know what? I may outside of Premodern, I have cast more Thwart than any other player on the planet.
That's easily true.
That's probably true. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like
I'm on 3 right now. I'm on 3.
Okay, 3.
Wrong. It's just wrong. Not literally any other card. Put in that 4th Thwart.
So are you running 4 foil too? 4 foil, 4 counter, 4 Thwart?
Like how I hereby stake I'm primarying Zach for the Stasis in Chief.
You don't want the smoke, Phil. I guess we'll find out. I'll put it up I'll put it up as whichever one of us does better with Stasis at LobsterCon.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So if you like, I know that you were apparently you were not planning on playing Stasis, so I think that knocks you right out of the contention.
I was planning on playing Stasis until I found my super sweet only Phil's tech, which, we can get into. I'll get into that super sweet tech if Phil's willing to go into his underrated and super underrated deck list.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. So, what I mentioned as like the top decks in my mind to prepare for are Stifle Knot, Terrageddon, Replenish, Black Green, and Mono Blue Tide. I think Goblins, which has historically been like a tier 1 deck, is still a good deck. And why I think it could be under the radar is that I think that some people there's some discussion about whether red is in a very bad place right now in Premodern in the meta, and that's primarily because Stifle Knot is so good and so popular that red decks often have a hard time against it, because a 12/12, on turn 2, turn 3, or whatever, is very hard to deal with. And yes, red has, Pyroblast and red Elemental Blast, but those cards have a mirror, and so they have Hydroblast and blue Elemental Blast, and they draw more cards than you, right? And so they're kind of in a bad place, but I think Goblins is still interesting because it does really well against like nonsense sometimes. Like if you don't answer turn 1 Lackey, sometimes you just lose, right? And what's been interesting also is that the Black Splash of Goblins has kind of made a little bit more traction recently. It did win a recent event for the Duress crew in the New England seasonal. Ian Adams was the pilot, and he had actually a great episode on the Hardcast podcast describing it, as well as his like philosophy on Magic. It was really good. I highly recommend it. But yeah, it's running a Black Splash, which I think can be pretty good right now. And the other decks that are kind of in my sort of under the radar, these are still popular decks, but so it's nothing crazy. I think Elves is still good. People were having some discussions about it prior to the last LobsterCon, and it ended up converting super well. I think there were only 4 pilots, but like 3 of them I think made it into top 32 or something like that. It's a really good deck. It's very hard to play. And so why I kind of put it as somewhat under the radar is that I don't expect a lot of people to bring it, because it's an expensive deck and a hard to play deck.
Base is $4,000 is tough, right?
Yeah. So I think it's like not one of those decks that you necessarily need to like allocate a ton of attention into, but if you are a good Elves pilot, I think it's like a good choice. And then the last 2 are Ponza Oath, which prior to the last LobsterCon was up there with Replenish as the 2 decks that people were the most worried about. It has not been as popular in the last couple months, and for a while everyone was packing Sabo's Web, like 2 of them in the side, sometimes in the main, and that card was really good against Ponza Oath, but I don't think it's as popular these days, and so that's one reason why I think it could be primed for a good placement. And then also,
could you tell me why Sabo's Web is good against Ponza Oath?
Yeah, it's because it comes down pretty fast. It's 2 mana, and it also draws a card. And so, if they have a Naturalize or a Disenchant, you still get value out of it. And Ponza Oath, they have their Terravores, but then they also primarily win through their man lands and utility lands.
Yeah.
And so locking down Rishadan Port, or if you can grab a Wasteland, is great. But yeah, like once you lay down a Sabo's Web, then they can't really pressure you as easily. So you have a lot more time to try to navigate around answering the Terravore or a Sphere Resistance, both the Druid, stuff like that. And yeah, it was just like, it's an artifact, right? So it could go in any deck, and it felt almost free because it would draw a card. So it was like just very popular choice. But why I think it's also well positioned now, besides people rolling back on Sabo's Web, is that these black-green decks are super popular right now. And while they do have Naturalize, black decks have historically had a hard time against Oath of Druids. And, they have Dystopia, which is pretty slow, but it's still good. But I think it could be well positioned. It got 2nd place at the Duress Crew Winter Regional event, so I think it could be pretty good. But this is also one of those super expensive decks, right? It has 4 Mox Diamonds in it. So it's not one of those that I think will be like 20% of the meta or anything like that. if you own the deck and you're comfortable playing it, could be a good choice. And then finally, the last deck is Enchantress. This is another somewhat more expensive deck because of the Sarah Sanctum, but I think it could be really good. It has a lot of answers to a lot of things. It has one of the best late games of any deck. So once it gets going, it's really hard to stop. And they just have a lot of flexible tools. Between green and white, you can basically answer any type of permanent. And I think it's good. And they've been trying out a lot of different things in the sideboard. So I think if you tune it right, it could be quite a good deck.
Phil, are you for or against Worldly Tutor in your Enchantress deck?
I personally do not play it. I have played Enchantress a few times, and I really like it. It's a very complicated deck in terms of like sequencing, but I typically do not play Worldly Tutor. I get why you would play it, because like the card draw you get is like intense. So like as soon as you get out the Argothian, you can probably make up most of the card disadvantage, but it's just like a really bad top deck too, like once you're comboing off. So yeah, those are like kind of my pseudo under the radar decks. Like I said, nothing is like groundbreaking or anything. I have a couple like under radar decks, which are Stasis, like I mentioned earlier. I think it's like, I don't know, I always feel like Stasis is like secretly really good, and I think it could be a good choice. Blue-White Control is a deck that I think could also be good. For a long time, Landstill was like one of the most popular decks, and it still remains a very popular deck in the Northeast. You know, it did win LobsterCon 2 years ago with Brian Selden, and I think where Blue-White Control really thrives is when there's like a known quantity of the meta where it can start crafting its answers to fit that. And I feel like we're in a spot in which people kind of know what the best decks are. And so like I think it could be pretty good. And like I said, I think Sabo's Web is on the decline. And so that card stopped a lot of your manlands too. And so I think it could be good. A Standstill is not bad against Dreadnought, you know, and you play meddling mages and counterspells and removal. I think it could be an interesting choice. And then finally, Tireless Tribe / Grotog. I kind of grouped them together because they have like very dedicated communities, and both of those decks play so many colors or can play so many colors that like there is no set like stock list. And so you could basically craft those decks to have any number of answers or threats. And so I think that, you know, a good player who is smarter than me might be able to like find the right assortment of threats and answers and do pretty well. So that's why I think that those decks could be pretty interesting as well.
Right, we're going to save Phil's deck tech until after the questions about the banned and restricted announcement that may or may not come now.
Yeah.
So
I do have two quick things, maybe three, while we're still on LobsterCon stuff.
Yes.
One is that I think in terms of like other under the radar, I do kind of feel like a fast graveyard combo deck could get there too. Even if it's not super fast, like it could be like Full English Breakfast or something, or maybe a Shallow Grave deck. Those decks are very popular for these big events. The Shallow Grave ones are, because your games typically go pretty fast. Gives you lots of time to like breathe and rest. And I do kind of feel like graveyard hate is on the decline. People are like so focused on Dreadnought right now, and like graveyard hate is like okay against replenish, but against a lot of the other decks it doesn't do that much. And so I think people might be like shaving down on the graveyard hate quite a bit. So I think that could be an interesting answer. And then I think one of the reasons why I like Stasis or like these kind of like blue decks as my under the radar decks is that I'm kind of wondering if Hibernation is like primed to be a good answer, because everyone is running like Terravores, Oath of Druids, like these walls, elephant tokens, Enchantress, like all these like green permanents. And like I'm just like send them all back, you know? And like I think it could be like kind of a good card, especially because another pretty popular sideboard cards that people are trying out these days are like Hidden Gibbons and Xantid Swarm.
Yeah, I saw that. Hidden Gibbons.
Yeah, primarily for Dreadnought. And you can just like send everything back. I think it's like kind of a good card. And then finally, I just want to say that like Stifle Knot is like super tricky to deal with right now because you can't really overload on artifact or creature destruction anymore. Like that was one of the big changes pioneered by David Raxa, and that led to Brian Selden and Lanny taking down LobsterCon this last year, which is like mono blue, Stifle Knot, Parallax Tide in the sideboard, right? Parallax Tide unaffected by creature removal, artifact removal, and so that was like a really good sideboard plan. And then people started to try to figure out how to like beat Parallax Tide. They hadn't even like gone to figure out how to beat it yet, but people were like working on it. And then David Raxa brought what he called, I think, Hootenanny Blue to a Duress Crew event, which is basically mono blue Stifle Knot, but no tides in the sideboard. Instead, he played Accumulated Knowledge and Dominate. And his reasoning was basically people are expecting Tide, and Terrageddon is a really hard deck, or can be a hard deck for Stifle Knot to deal with. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to outdraw them. We're going to use Accumulated Knowledge, draw a bunch of cards, and we're going to use Dominate on their Terravores or their Call to Herd tokens, whatever. And so suddenly people are like, oh man, do I need to prepare for Tide, or do I need to prepare for this thing? And recently, a lot of the mono blue Stifle Knot players have been just throwing everything in. So like they will have Tide, they'll have Accumulated Knowledge, they'll have Dominate. They also sometimes even have Brain Freeze in the sideboard, which is a popular juke even before LobsterCon. And so now there's like this array of different threats that you don't know how to prepare for. And so I think that's going to be one of the biggest wild cards going to LobsterCon is, is there going to be yet another sideboard tech thing that will be unveiled there? And like, it's just become really hard for people to deal with. So anyway, I think that's like kind of my wrap on LobsterCon prep. I'll also give a quick shout out to the Duress Crew based outside of Boston in New England. They put together this website called data.duresscrew.com. And basically they've gathered a whole bunch of matchup data from both online and paper and webcam, and have tried to put together like a grid, I guess, of win rates. And so I think if you're preparing for LobsterCon, it's a really good resource to use to identify which are kind of the most played decks. Obviously, the meta can be vary quite a bit from place to place, but it'll show you kind of strengths and weaknesses of different decks, and so you can learn and base your research off of it.
Cool. Awesome. That's a great resource. Finding the right high-end cards for legacy, vintage, pre-modern, or old-school Magic can be challenging. That's where friends 3-for-1 Trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's top Magic the Gathering retailers with an incredible selection of premium singles, sealed product, and even full sets, all available with free, fast, and secure worldwide shipping.
They add fresh inventory every Wednesday with weekly deals and discounts. So whether you're hunting for that elusive piece of power, a legacy staple, or something spicy for your collection, they've got you covered.
First high-end orders over $500 or 500 euros, use the code EDFREE to get free worldwide shipping.
Check them out now at the number 3, the number 4, the number 1.gg/ED. That link takes you right to the shop and helps support the channel.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
Yeah,
all right.
It's awesome.
So let's talk about the possible upcoming ban announcement. So let's talk about the state of Black right now. You said that Black isn't as bad off as maybe Martin Berlin had painted it in that last roundtable.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion was basically that it's true that Black is not as strong as the other colors in terms of like haymakers. A lot of them are banned, right? Yawgmoth's Will, Yawgmoth's Barring, Necropotence, Demonic Consultation, Tendrils of Agony, like all those cards are banned, right? But, I think that how you view the health of a format doesn't necessarily have to be, is each color equally strong, right? Like that's one way to evaluate the health of a format. That's personally not mine, but some people do evaluate it like that. And so if you evaluate it like that, then yes, like Black was underpowered. But in my mind, Black had always been like a really good role player in a lot of different decks. Like, Duress, great card, Cabal Therapy, great card. And you could put those in a lot of different places. But I think one of the concerns was basically that among the top tier decks, there was no quote unquote Black deck, right? For a while, there was the Rock, which I think most people would argue is primary green with like splashes of black, but still had black cards. But other than that, most of the other powerful decks were not black. And so, some people had concerns about that. And so I I think that Discord had reached a point in which obviously Martin Berlin or other people had noticed. But in my mind, I think there had always been a decent amount of solid tier 2 black decks that weren't as popular. If you look at the meta share of a lot of the big tournaments, not a lot of people brought these decks or black decks, but sometimes they would pop up. I'd say that like there's the Contamination deck built by Alvaro Galindo has been doing really, really well. There's also like an Iggy Pop deck by Phil Altman, who I think got top 8 at Euros.
Invite him to OnlyFills.
Yeah, he was part of one of the people that I just like friended on Discord and been like, hey, I see you're a Phil in Premodern too. I would love to connect. So there's that. Obviously, there are these the black-green survival decks and broccoli soup decks and pitless pit wreck decks are become a lot more popular too. And then there's Nick Balzano also won a Duress Crew event with like quote unquote tin fins. And so, you know, it's possible that a lot of those decks do not maintain like tier 2 status. Excuse me, but you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. And since Martin made that announcement, I think people have been playing a lot more black or black adjacent decks and
They're
found
like, we'll
relative
show them. We'll
success.
make black good again.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. Like, I don't
Play
know.
black so they don't unban. Well, let's talk about the cards that we do or do not want them to unban. You know, a big zeitgeist of these cards has been talk about Necropotence, talk about Entomb, and talk about Tendrils of Agony in varying levels of these are possible things that would put a black deck up to that, you know, to that level.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options for unbanning a black card if that's what Martin wants to do. I think Entomb is one of the most popular choices. In my mind, it's one of the least interesting choices because I think Entomb basically makes it so that Reanimator is a better deck. Like that's great, but I also don't think that Entomb adds a lot of other deck options. Like it won't be like a core pillar of black decks to build around, right? It basically you get Reanimator, which is great. Like a lot of people like that play style. But other than that, you might get like another Spirit Prison deck, and then maybe someone will try like Entomb for Roar the Worm or Entomb for Squee or whatever. But I don't think those will make a big impact. And so I'm not super high on Entomb. I think the other risk is that Reanimator would just be a worse Stifle Knot because you're essentially
agreed.
You're spending these resources to get a creature, and the creature you get will be smaller than the 12/12, and you'll have less tools to protect it too. Like your protection spells are discard, whereas theirs are like daze,
foil,
stuff like that. And they're also going to draw a lot more cards than you. So like in my mind, it's not great. And what it does is it forces pre-modern players to load their sideboards with like Tormod's Crypt. And so suddenly your sideboard is being pulled in so many directions that it might just end up being a crapshoot.
My thought there was that since they're probably going to ban it in Legacy, why not let them play it?
It's true. Right? Maybe after Monday we'll see. We'll see.
Free those Entombs for another format, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think Necropotence is another popular card that people talk about. It has a lot of pros and cons. I honestly think that Necropotence would not be overly strong because a lot of times people are like, Necropotence is broken, you have Dark Ritual, you Dark Ritual into Necropotence, you draw a bunch of cards, and then you win the game. But the hard part is winning the game. Like in Premodern, like you can draw a bunch of cards, of these black cards, but the win con is not necessarily so clear. And so I think it could be okay. My problem with Necropotence is that you can't really answer it once it's in play, right? Like you just draw a bunch of cards. And so I think there will be a non-zero amount of games in which people will just get blown out by Necropotence. They'll be like, oh, my opponent, the turn 1 Necro, drew, 9 cards or whatever, and it was just a terrible experience. Like, even if that happens 1 in 100, 1 in 200 games, like, you will talk about that one game, and it'll just be a bad experience, right? But I think it could be okay for those, like, other 99 times. But
knowing that, so they effectively reprinted Necropotence into modern card design with Necrodominance, and seeing people like sort of tinker with that in the younger formats. If Necropotence came unbanned, I think the ground zero is you're playing all the fast mana, right? You have Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual and all that, but I think the Dark Ritual into Necropotence draw, however many cards you draw, and then so like if you draw all of your cards, granted that means like that buoys burn, like burn gets to have something to just chew on, which can be good if like that it feels like Stifle Knot is really pressing against burn right now. But I think the play pattern of like put Necro into play a Lotus Petal, Chain of Vapor, bounce my Necropotence. I have all these cards and my draw step back, and the going down on cards effectively doesn't matter, a la like all the pitch spells that they would play in common times. And then if that play pattern is good, like that is a viable strategy to do, then that becomes like so redundant of like the only thing that matters is this one thing. And there's plenty of ways to combat it. Like there's annulls and there's foils and there's discard, and like it's not like it's like any other combo deck that we can interact with. The question then I would pose for that type of the questioning for that unban is that play pattern interesting if it becomes the best way to do it? Because those cards are always going to try and compel the combo players to optimize as much as possible.
This is the exact argument, and I use Phil Blechman's argument that he poses here whenever someone says unban Mind Twist in Legacy, because like, would it be powerful? Maybe. Would it be interesting? Probably not.
Yeah. So the other black cards which people have talked about, and I've actually come around on this, is Yawgmoth's Will, and I think it's one of those cards that people immediately hear and they're like, absolutely not. Like if you played Vintage or you played Type 2 or whatever, or Cube, I think people just have really bad experiences with Yawgmoth's Will. They're like, you cast Yawgmoth's Will, you're going to win the game. I think in Premodern, it's not as straightforward. Like there is the Iggy Pop deck, and so there's like some sort of like beginnings of a shell that you can like figure out how to combo out. Yawgmoth's Will does have like an exile clause, which complicates things. But I think that with Premodern, without Tendrils of Agony, Yawgmoth's Will might end up being more of like a value piece later on, like later in the game, which is, in my mind, okay. It's like, everyone has access to Tormod's Crypt or whatever graveyard hate. And so, there's obviously Replenish, which effectively wins the game, if you do a late game or even mid game. And so I kind of feel like Yawgmoth's Will is an interesting choice. It could fit in a lot of different decks. That's kind of my sleeper pick.
Phil, sorry, I'm just catching up here.
Yeah.
When you say Yawgmoth's Will, do you mean Bosium Strip? Do you mean Premodern staple Bosium Strip?
I mean lesser powered Bosium Strip, because Yawgmoth's Will only works once, whereas Bosium Strip you can just do over and over.
Oh yeah, so powerful, Bosium Strip. Bosium Strip was one of those cards like Elkin Bottle, where like I looked at both the card and the art and I was like, what's happening here? If you've ever looked at Elkin Bottle and just been like, what is going on?
Yeah,
exactly. Bosium Strip's art is exactly right for what the card does.
Yeah, of course. So is Elkin Bottles.
You will just try and you will spin your wheels trying to find a way to make it work, only to realize that it doesn't work. But you'll still be satisfied. You'll still be satisfied because you're like the search continues.
Yeah, I have used Bosium Strip in one of my False Cure decks. It was not great, but it was very fun. Yeah, I think Yawgmoth's Will, people run the argument that it doesn't have to be a black deck, right, that uses it, because it's only 2 colorless and a black, and so like maybe you would fit into Burn as like a last, you would just play fetch lands and baubles and have a late game, play all your burn spells again, which is possible, but I think it's an interesting card. And it would fit in a lot of different decks, right?
Oh, man, Yawgmoth LED Burn. That's
sure.
That's the world everybody's looking to play in.
So
sure.
I guess the next question is, so are there any other cards? This is a two-pronged question. Are there any other cards that you think could power black that aren't necessarily unban this black card? And then the follow-up to that is, do you actually think with a month left that Martin Berlin will make these changes to the format?
I don't think he will make any changes before LobsterCon. There's also Flippy Bohm, who is another Philip. He's hosting a Premodern GP that's coming up very soon, and then Euros are coming up. There's like too many events, I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like tomorrow is not tomorrow, but like, the first is like the last day, but that you can conceivably do it that won't like ruin events, right?
Yeah. And, another event series going on right now that just started the other day, the European Premodern Invitational Challenge. It's like a big webcam series, and Martin Berlin is actually one of the players, which is an awesome surprise. He's the founder of Premodern. And we were kind of speculating if during the reveal it would be like he'd be playing like an unbanned black card or something, and that would be like the announcement.
He's
Which
like, I
is pretty
changed
sweet.
it.
Yeah, just for the event, just for me. But yeah, he's playing some sweet decks. He's playing Mono Blue Stifle Nod, Elves, and Blue-White Rebels list. Anyway, like I don't think anything will change immediately because like the events are coming up. I think black decks are seeing somewhat of a resurgence. And then I did actually want to quickly touch on Tendrils of Agony, which is another card that people have thought about unbanning. Which I honestly think would not be like overly strong in Premodern. And there are a lot of Storm players who miss that type of play. You know, Premodern does have like Frantic Storm with Brain Freeze or Iggy Pop with Brain Freeze. So it kind of exists, but Tendrils makes things a lot easier. And so there isn't like necessarily a lot of quote unquote spell based combo in Premodern. There is a few decks, but none of them are like top tier. And so that's like a strategy which people think would open up if Tendrils of Agony came about. But yeah, what was the first question? You said other cards that
Were there
would.
any cards that weren't just unban this black card that you think could change the format in a way that would help black decks out?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it in my newsletter, but besides like unbanning a black card, you could ban other cards, which I don't think is the right strategy, but
Yeah, I mean, like
it's
ban Lightning
possible.
Bolt and then then you can play
Exactly.
not
Like for example, something that comes up from time to time is banning Swords to Plowshares. Like Swords to Plowshares is easily by far and away the best single target removal spell in Premodern. It's like basically unconditional, right? And theoretically, like Black's wheelhouse is supposed to be creature destruction, right? And so if you theoretically removed Swords to Plowshares, suddenly people would be much more incentivized to play Black so that you could play Smother, Vendetta, Snuff Out, stuff like that.
the
Yeah,
polar opposite of Swords to Plowshares.
yeah,
Vendetta.
exactly. And so like that's an option, but it's probably not gonna happen, but
Yeah.
that is one option.
Yeah, I think I mean I personally think that like Swords to Plowshares is sort of a format pillar. Like that's
Yeah.
what makes white worth playing a lot of times.
Yeah, and I'd say that one of the more interesting ideas that people have brought up was adding in supplemental sets. So, Premodern is a format, but there's also middle school, which is a similar format played by a lot of people as well. And middle school includes sets like Portal. It includes supplemental sets like anthologies, beatdown, stuff like that.
You can play
But
Nelothony Dragon or whatever.
yeah,
Phil, if Portal comes in, what's the first thing you personal tutor for?
for Portal,
Well,
probably
Portal comes in, we get access to personal tutor. I know all the Phils out there are excited about personal tutor.
Yeah,
Cruel
We're on
bargain.
top of our deck.
we're just absolutely going to put Thwart on top. But yeah, I personally don't think that Portal will be added, but I think that there is a sidestep, which is there's like this beatdown box set, which actually has a lot of interesting cards in it. I don't remember all the cards, but
Well, specifically white bordered Arabian Nights Mountain.
Yeah, it would have that. It would also have Hymn to Torok, which I don't personally think is a very interesting addition to Black, but it would make Black stronger. It is a very Black card. Some people will complain about the gameplay, which is true. I mean, having your lands discarded or whatever sucks, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like exiling all of your lands to Parallax Tide is much worse than losing 2 random cards. Right.
It's interesting bringing that box set in. Now, it's been a minute, so correct me if I'm wrong here. It was a red-black deck versus a white-green deck, so you're not adding any blue cards, right?
I don't remember.
The beatdown box set, I don't think included any blue cards. Now, I'm not positive on that. It's been a while, but I think it was like 2 beatdown decks that went against each other, so they didn't include blue in that one, which would be interesting because I kind of feel like blue is the most powerful color in Premodern, so not adding anything would be fine.
So the theory I had heard was if you add anthologies and beatdown. So if you do that, it would add 8 cards to Premodern's card pool, which is Combat Medic, Goblin Grenade, Hymn to Turok, Icatian Javelineers, Kurt Ape, Lady Orca, Pendlehaven, and Snapping Drake. So yeah, so of those, there's a few playable cards. Like Goblin Grenade obviously would fit into maybe a hybrid Goblins
Like a
burn
Goblin
deck.
burn kind of situation, yeah.
Hymn to Turok we talked about. Javelineers would fit into like your mono white weenie decks. Curd Ape, people have been asking for a long time. And Pendelhaven would also be a good addition to like mono green Stompy. Elves maybe would play one. I don't really know. But, I think that why I think this is interesting is it adds like some good cards that people would be interested in playing. Doesn't break the format. And, people say it's a slippery slope because you're essentially adding in new sets into a defined format, which could be true. But I don't know. It might be worth it. Like you're not adding in any new sets because these are sort of like Chronicles. They're like reprint sets, right? The only difference is that like I forget what the exact definition for Premodern was. It was like type 2 playable or something like that,
Yeah.
and like Chronicles was, but these beatdown anthology sets were not. And so I guess, some people are like, it'd be complicated to explain, but I'd just be like, they are type 2 legal sets plus reprint supplemental boxes or
Yeah.
whatever.
That's fine.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just another idea if you wanted to push black. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of options. We'll see.
Well, now we've entered the Phil Blechman talks about his weird deck section of the cast.
No,
Yeah, which everyone's been waiting for.
I'm gonna surprise everybody at LobsterCon. Thanks everybody for joining. I'll see you on my birthday. So there's also like a couple of other cards that I'm curious that are really powerful in formats. In other formats that they're in, they are powerful like backbones of decks that just don't see anything. And so I know Phil and I have talked about this like outside of the podcast before, but there are certain things that are like unique things that are cool build-arounds that every time LobsterCon comes around, I'm always looking at these unexplored build-arounds essentially. And the biggest one that comes to mind is something like Ensnaring Bridge. And like how do we like actually maximize being able to like build around an Ensnaring Bridge deck, which is similar to what I imagine like the Tempting Worm type builds where you like just strip somebody's hand apart and then do that. There's also Grindstone is in the format. I get that there's no Painter Servant, but like if that doesn't get your Johnny senses tingling, I don't know. You know what I mean? There's
we used
also
to just play it as we were like Millstone with a bonus.
There's been,
there you go.
I know, I want to say it was, this time last year that I just shipped Phil a Scrap Heap deck. And I'm like, this is the only card in the format that has the word whenever on it. Like, there's got to be something broken here. And for those who don't know, it's a card that just says whenever an artifact hits the graveyard, you gain a life. But whenever is so powerful that like there's got to be something going on. And so I'm more curious. Like I've been brewing with Wand of Denial. That's real. That's my.
It's such a sweet deck.
It's such a sweet like build around for my miracle sensibilities, and I can't wait to like brew with that in some capacity and bring it to LobsterCon for one of the two events. It's certainly the at least the warm up or the side events or whatever. You're going to see me tapping a Wand of Denial. So are there any standout cards beyond decks? Are there any cards that people just haven't explored? Because I feel like when Ponza last year was what I feel like is the replenish of this year, where it was like, you got to be ready. You got to be ready for this deck. It's going to crush you. You got to be ready for it. And if you're not, you're just going to get blown out by it. And then it just didn't do well and has since fallen off. And it was the same thing the year before. Full English Breakfast won the event. And then the following year, it was just like absent from the room entirely. And so it's like, where are like, there's clearly still space to be explored. And like the talk of certain cards propel people to then engage with it and then test it and then play with it. And there's a lot of room for that because Ponza came around and then disappeared. Full English Breakfast came around and then disappeared. There's still decks. You can still play them. They're still good. But like, what else is out there that we're not exploring?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so Ensnaring Bridge was definitely one of those cards that I was playing around with. So like, I wasn't able to go last minute to LobsterCon last year, but if I had, I would have played this Guilty Oath deck that I had been working on, which is essentially a pit rack, but with Oath of Druids, and it would oath into a Guilt Feeder, which is like an 0/5 creature, and I ran, I think, 3 Ensnaring Bridges in the main, so Guilt Feeder could still attack through an Ensnaring Bridge. And I liked it at the time because I was like, it's pretty good against Dreadnought and Terravor if you can get it out. Obviously, Dreadnought can bounce it or phase it or whatever, but it's still like one more thing that they have to deal with. So Ensnaring Bridge, I think, is definitely a pretty interesting card. You just have to find the right shell for it. And yeah, like Wand of Denial is just such a sweet card. People have experimented with it in the past, and I think it remains like a pretty cool card to brew around.
Phil, did you tell people what Wand of Denial does?
Wand of Denial is tap, look at top card of either player's library. You can choose to put a non-land card into their graveyard by paying 2 life. But as somebody who knows me, that I love me a good counterbalance, and I love controlling tops of libraries, and to have ways to be able to manipulate that in an enjoyable way is great.
Phil, have you heard of this card called Zur's Weirding? I know Phil Nguyen has heard of Zur's Weirding, but have you heard of Zur's Weirding?
We all know Zur's Weirding as the card that everybody was trying to use to rebuild Parfait after the land tax ban. And why would you do that when you have Wand of Denial? Now, Phil, here's a question for you. What is the better way to gain life? Is it multiple life bursts with Intuition? Is it Oath into Ancestors Chosen? Or is it Gush and Ivory Tower?
Wow. I thought you were going to say Convalescent Care, because I have played that recently, and it's been pretty sweet. Obviously, it's a super risky card, but I mean, Oath into Ancestors Chosen is so good. It's like pretty nuts. But there's also Words of Worship that people would try too. I feel like you can't go wrong. I mean, Life Burst is actually secretly one of those cards which I really like a lot, and I have 4 of them in like Japanese foil ready for False Cure
For that day.
Because I'm speculating. I'm like, okay, if Necropotence gets unbanned, right? There's not many decks that can win at instant speed, like after you draw the cards. But what if you Necro for like 19 cards, and then you draw, I don't know, some Dark Ritual or False Cure or Life Burst, and you discard 3 of the Life Bursts, and then you with those exile triggers on the stack, you cast False Cure, maybe cast a second False Cure and a Life Burst, which is still 6 mana. But if you did that, they would lose like a ton of life, and you could win at instant speed. So I don't know. It's a card that I've been interested in trying.
The old Reverent Silence trick is a thing you could do too, right?
Well, Reverent Silence is a sorcery. That's the problem.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of good options there.
We were speaking about weird brew ideas, and I wanted to throw out one of mine from this is back during when Tempest Block was a thing. I had this deck that broke the meta. It was Static Orb and Thumbscrews.
Wow, look at the explosion.
Yeah, clearly that's your winning deck, Zach.
That's
I don't know how that happened, but it was amazing.
You should play that, and
then every time you cast that spell, we need like a pyrotechnics team in the back.
That was the coolest thing I've ever seen happen on this platform.
Yeah. All right, I will admit it. I do not know what Thumbscrews.
Thumbscrews is a vice for yourself, but it only deals 1 damage. So it deals damage to your opponent if you have more than 4 cards in your hand. So you need something that would
if you have 5 or more cards in your hand.
Yeah, and you need something that would do damage to your opponent without using mana because of Static Orb. And the game was dominated at the time by Curse Scroll.
Yes.
So you had to find a way to get the to get in damage as you're locking down. Like, this is pure lockdown. Like everything you could do to lock down the game.
So Phil, speaking of Scrap Heap, why haven't I
didn't see any fireworks in the background, so I don't know if we're supposed to be talking about.
We got Chromatic Sphere, we got Urza's Bauble, we got Argivian Find. Is Argivian Find as an engine piece just like waiting to be cracked? I mean, it's only ever seen play as a one of in the old Parfait lists where my land taxes were still in the mail getting banned. Like, where's Argivian Find in the format? What's going on?
That is actually a really good card, and it may be the time. So the newsletter that I just published before this was actually an interview with Rafael Caron, aka K-Run, who was the inventor of Parfait, and he obviously loves Argivian Find, and so it might be the time for that. Is there like a combo with infinite looping artifacts? Is that a thing in Premodern?
I mean, I hear that there's the word whenever on Scrap Heap.
Doomsday. Infinite looping your Lodestone Bauble.
That's true. Oh man, of course, Lodestone Bauble. There is Lodestone Bauble is actually very popular in the New York City meta.
It helps me build after an Armageddon pretty well.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I guess there's also like Turtle Splash, which loops artifacts, but they gain life with Claws of Gix. I guess they don't need scrap. I don't know. I'm gonna have to take a look at this. You know, we just finished up, more or less finished up Spice Paradise Season 2, which is my webcam league that focuses on like brews and spicy decks. And so in about 6 months, when Season 3 comes out, I might have to take a look at some of these brews that Phil Blechman's been talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, Phil, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time. And wait, I'm going to do it again. Awesome.
These are the powers that are granted to a Stasis.
I don't know.
admin?
This is the first time I've ever seen that happen.
Only the Stasis in Chief can pull this off.
Yeah, that is a Discord only thing. If you were the Discord, that's what Stasis looks like to the opponent, apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, we really appreciate having you come on to give us sort of a primer before LobsterCon. And yeah, if you guys dug this video, if you want to see more of either Phil or any Phil, go ahead and like the
Only
video.
Phils.
Comment below.
Only Phils.
Comment below your favorite Phil.
And not only comment your only Phil, but this is also the cliffhanger. Stick around for episode 2 with all the only Phils, where we have all the Phils on, where we're going to exclusively talk about didgeridoo. It's coming to a video near you.
All right, have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.